with generative AI, we also have this sort of complicating, factor in that it introduces a new set of risks, a new set of challenges in terms of like how we look at and mitigate concerns around fairness. What do we do to ensure the data is truthful, like the veracity of the responses that come back?
Welcome to another episode of Data Strategy Unraveled. I'm your host, Khendr'a Reid, Principal Data Strategy Tech Specialist here at AWS. And in today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about responsible AI. If you've been watching this channel, we had some episodes around generative BI and generative AI and the different things you can do in that. But one of the key things that you want to think about when leveraging these technologies is how can we make sure we're being responsible with the AI that we're producing and the models that we're creating here. So to help with this discussion, I have a great guest here. She's been mentioned in Forbes, CIO.com, Essence, and I think she was one of the top 15 people to know in enterprise AI by Business Insider. So Diya Wynn. Hey, Diya, how you doing?
Hey, thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you for joining. Really thankful for you to have you here on this channel today. Want to just kick off with just telling us a little bit about yourself and where you're joining us from.
Sure. So I am a native New Yorker, but I live in the Maryland area, Annapolis area, and I've been here for a little while. So that's where I am joining you from. Get to be in my home office today and not on the road, which is a good thing. Although I like travel, it's always nice to be home. And yeah, super excited to be here. And this is a topic that is something that I get, the opportunity to talk about a lot, as well as I recognize extreme value and importance of being able to, one, understand, the areas of risk and potential impact with technology, but also being able to give people, things that they can actually do, both in process as well as, with technology to be able to address those and make sure that the systems are built in ways that are safe,
Mhm.
inclusive, as well as responsible. So I'm glad to be able to share with our audience today.
Yeah, yeah. So let's just kick off with, what exactly is responsible AI?
Yeah, I gave you a little bit of that, a little teaser of that
Yeah.
in my introduction, but I like to think about responsible AI as being an organizational structure. You'll hear people use this term interchangeably, sometimes with ethical AI or trustworthy AI. The intention is that we're thinking about the things that are necessary with intentional action to put in place the kind of organizational structure that creates a culture of responsibility. Everybody knows their part, their role, in developing and addressing the risks, right?
Mhm.
Addressing the areas where there is potential for unintended impact so that you can get maximum benefit. And hopefully that benefit isn't just to the business or the product developer, but also to like all of the customers and society as a whole. And that's the way that I like to describe it. So it means that we're looking at things that, have the potential to cause a system not to work as well as it should, or that would elevate areas of, bias that could be harmful to certain groups, and making sure that we're doing those things so that the systems actually, can be things that we trust. That's the
Yeah,
foundation, right? We want
yeah,
to be able to trust the technology, trust the products that we're using, trust the company that's building those, and ultimately get benefit from it.
yeah. And that's funny that you say that because on this channel we talked a lot about when it comes to utilizing data and generative AI, those technologies, it first starts with the culture, the people, the processes that you have in place. And that sounds right in line with what you're talking about there with when it comes
Absolutely.
to, having that foundation in place, right? Everyone sees generative AI or in this case, responsible AI at the top. But underneath that is right, what is the data foundation? Do we have data quality? Do we have the governance in place to be able to trust the data that we have there? Those type of things. No, that's
Right.
that's yeah.
And that data governance, right? So in some ways, we're not talking about things that are so different or distinct from things that you've been mentioning or that practices that we've had in organizations before. So
Right.
this is an element of looking at and thinking about security compliance and the way and risk and how we manage that risk, right? Bringing in data governance and making sure we have a strategy in terms of ensuring that we're ethically sourcing data and we know how it's being used and then incorporating that or inculcating that into a broader, strategy around AI. So all of these pieces are tangential to like,
Mhm.
what do we need to consider to be able to reduce the risk, and make sure that these systems, work well for all.
Yeah. And so we kind of already talked about it a little bit, but when it comes to generative AI specifically, is there anything differently that has to be done when you're thinking about being responsible AI, having that, ethical AI in place as opposed to your traditional AI ML that you might have done before?
Well, so I would say that there are a different set of risks,
Mm.
right? So, we certainly were talking about with fairness and bias or the potential for bias in our data and our algorithms with traditional or classical AI and machine learning. We were talking about like security considerations and making sure the data is safe in
Hmm.
transmit as well as or is protected, right, in environments. All of those things are still hold true, right?
Hmm.
We still have to be thinking about that. But with generative AI, we also have this sort of complicating, factor in that it introduces a new set of risks, a new set of challenges in terms of like how we look at and mitigate concerns around fairness. What do we do to ensure the data is truthful, like the veracity of the responses that come back? How do we consider things around intellectual property and copyright, some of which will be decided, legally and not necessarily, based on technology? The increased potential for misinformation and disinformation because generative AI is making the ability to have social engineering and other content being created in rapid form
Yeah.
and exacerbating or exploiting vulnerabilities in a much faster pace. All of that is now, I think the next level of consideration that needs to be taken when we think about generative AI. Some of the approaches are the same, and then others are, certainly have to be expanded because uh, generative AI is a little bit more complex than um, traditional ML is and requires some new techniques or some new considerations, right? So if we're thinking about fairness and bias, if we're using something general purpose like some of the chatbots, well, what looks like a bias and how we test for that and ensure that we're not perpetuating or amplifying societal biases requires a little bit more diligence, perhaps, than when we were doing this in a traditional ML sex. Making sure that we have transparency and we're exposing, when AI is being used, when content is being generated by AI becomes essential, right, versus, what might have been done before. And then, all that needs to be done in order to ensure that we don't produce kind of
Yeah.
dangerous or harmful content, right? Like, again, I think when we think about the principles of responsible AI or the structure of responsible AI and having this framework in place, if we do that foundational things,
Hmm.
some of the how do we protect our systems and our people is somewhat the same.
Yeah.
And we have a framework to be able to do that.
Yeah. Okay. And so how are customers approaching this, right? What do you see those first steps that they're taking, and I guess like what are some of the challenges that they're struggling with when it comes to trying to be more responsible with the AI that they're creating?
I'd say one of the first challenges I think that folks encounter is balancing or the trade-off between their interest and desire to use this new technology and be an early mover, an earlier adopter, if you will,
Hmm.
all of the potential they believe exists in terms of being able to innovate with the technology and like the additional investment that's required to put all the responsible AI
Yeah.
things in place, right?
Yeah.
Um, it would be irresponsible of me to say that like you just do this responsible building and implementation and it just doesn't cost anymore, or it's not an investment of time and perhaps resources and additional work. But what we do believe is that the investment is worth right? It's worth it. That additional resource, the additional time is worth it. And oftentimes that is like one of the challenges. We want to move fast. Like, do we really need to like think about this process? Do we do we want to do the extra testing necessary, right? Like balancing that, because it does require a little bit more in terms of time. So I think that's one of the first things. The other is like, well, who needs to know, right? Who needs to be equipped? This is not something that's just isolated to the data scientist or the AI engineer or the machine learning engineer. Actually, everybody in the process needs to be understanding like where risks occur, where there is the potential for bias, what we need to be thinking about from a transparency perspective, and then everyone has a role to play. And so that requires a degree of education and training that perhaps isn't happening across the entire organization, but might today just be isolated in a specific area. And we're now saying we need more people involved in that process because we want these principles, this thought process, these questions to be asked throughout the entire life cycle, and not just isolated to, testing at the end, or as we used to say, like throwing it over the fence and hoping that, the people responsible for managing in production think about that, right? Know
Yeah.
that this requires a sort of full life cycle
Yeah.
consideration, through all of the stakeholders throughout the entire process. And so I think those are two kind of first things that are often challenges or things that, businesses or companies are encountering, and need to be much more mindful of as they start on this journey, right?
Yeah, so now everyone essentially has a responsibility when it comes to ensuring the trust is there. It's almost like working in a regulated industry, right? Everyone that's touching that data has
Yeah,
to ensure that they're doing the
right,
right
right,
things to secure the
exactly.
data. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And so, as we wrap up here, what are some ways that customers can learn more about responsible AI and maybe really start their journey on incorporating that into the practices that they're doing today?
Sure, sure. So there's a great course a friend of mine created, Dr. Elizabeth Adams. It's a LinkedIn learning course talking about leading a responsible AI organization. I think that's great. It was free at one point, maybe minimally priced at this particular point, but that's something that's LinkedIn learning. We certainly have on our skill builder, AWS skill builder is a great resource where there is, a number of courses that talk about like AI and AI strategy for business and responsible AI, some of that content there. We have a responsible AI webpage, from an AWS perspective that is highlighting, some of the elements of our strategy, some, customer references, our responsible AI guide. We have a responsible use policy. All of that stuff is linked to the responsible AI webpage. And then there are some, courses and content that comes out of Machine Learning University that's also focused on like responsible AI. So when we talk about that specifically, and I would also say that Amazon Science is one of our resources online where we have probably published, somewhere in the order of 500 or so different science papers and research that's being done across a number of areas, including responsible AI, that can be, resources and to those that are much more technically focused that are interested in exploring. And then those that are customers can certainly reach out to their account teams. We have folks like myself and others that are in different parts of the business that in the Generative AI Innovation Center, in public policy, throughout the business that are all, eager, and love talking about this as much as I do, but get an opportunity to help our customers through that process too.
Okay. Yeah. So we'll be sure to put a lot of that information into the video description below. And now the Machine Learning University, I've actually used that a little bit as well. And that's a really great resource to learn more around machine learning and those different components there. But as we wrap up here, thank you, Dia, for taking the time to join us today and provide us just a tidbit of the wealth of information when it comes to responsible AI. We definitely have to have you back again to kind of dive into this some more. And to our viewers, thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you all again in the next Data Strategy Unravel episode.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thank
Take
you.
care.